paid program. Advice and opinions are those of Jung's Garden Center, not WBEV or Good Karma Brands.
Doctor on 95.3 WBEV. We are joined again with the garden doctor himself, Dick Zondag. Dick, great to have you back in the studio.
Yeah, good morning.
And I want to thank you. You brought a whole bunch of different things today. I see a few
Yep.
plants, and I'm holding some bulbs in my hand.
Yep, those
These-
are tulip bulbs.
And this is still the right time to plant the bulbs.
Yes, you plant tulips from about the 1st of September through the time the ground freezes. And you want to get them in the ground because they have to root down. Plant them 8 to 10 inches deep so that they are in nice, cool soil in the summertime. That way the bulbs stay nice and big. They don't divide. And that way they have a chance to root down before the cold weather comes, because the soil doesn't freeze as fast as the tops, and they root down, and then the inhibitors are degraded while the bulbs are being cooled. And then next spring, when the soil thaws, up come your tulips and daffodils and crocus and hyacinths and all sorts of things.
So you mentioned that we can still plant bulbs until the ground freezes, but that's not necessarily the same time that we get the first frost. Or
No. That probably goes into late November.
Okay, so we still have at least a
got
month.
a lot of time. But the earlier you get them in, the better they're going to be, because then they have that chance to root down while the soil is still warm. If you plant them into November, you probably should mulch them so that the soil stays warmer for a longer period of time, so they do have a chance to root down. And we've got a very good selection of bulbs. I would say probably 35 or 40 different varieties, and I brought some of the unusual ones along here, the fringed and the Rembrandt tulips. And then the daffodils, we have several varieties of daffodils. And then we also have bulk bulbs, so if you don't want to buy a pre-counted bag of bulbs, you can buy as many as you want or as few as you want. And we have those in the 5 different colors, I think. And then I also brought along a bag of fertilizer, because it's also good to put some fertility mix it in the soil that you put back around the bulb, because that way the bulb will have some fertility to make it grow better, and you'll have a much nicer display next spring.
And this is fertilizer. It probably is going to be heavier on the phosphorus stuff to get those roots
Right.
deep in the ground.
It usually has bone meal in it, and some of the other things that the roots like. Usually not a lot of nitrogen, because that forces a lot of top growth, but it's specially formulated for bulbs and for, I think you can even use that on perennials if you've got some left over, because it's good for the root health of the plants.
Speaking with Dick Zondag, the garden doctor, last week we had Leah Stark in, and she was mentioning that the next day was the official start of Jung's Dollar Days, and that is going on now, where you get Jung's Dollars for every purchase.
Great.
And is it tomorrow that we can redeem them? We can start redeeming?
Yes, it is.
So is it just Thursday or the whole weekend?
No, it's the whole weekend. Yeah, it's the whole weekend. It'll be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for the Randolph Garden Center. So, you can redeem the Jung Dollars now, and you don't have to bring them in, because we have them in our computer. You know, we had Jung Dollars that you had to keep a few years ago, but we got new software for our POS system, and it keeps track of the number of Jung Dollars that you accumulate through the year. And you can come in and they can tell you how many Jung Dollars you have, and then you put a green dollar with a Jung Dollar, and you get $2 worth of merchandise.
The continuing a digital evolution of Jung's Garden Center is exciting to see. Let's go to the phones. We have our first call for the garden doctor this morning. And hello, caller. What is your question for the garden doctor?
Good morning. I actually have 3 different plants that I need help with. I have a hydrangea that goes, all the stems die down and it all comes back up in the spring.
Okay.
And I only get 1 or 2 blossoms on that a year. How do I make it get more blossoms?
As listeners know, hydrangea is not my favorite topic because there are so many different types of hydrangeas, and some of them are hardy, some of them are borderline, some of them are not hardy. It depends on the species that you have, because there are some that have flowers on the plants when they go into the winter, which is probably what you have. So you don't want to trim any of the stems off, because then you're cutting your flowers off. Hydrangeas, if you want to get them to flower better, I would say fertilize them. Maybe do a little root pruning, take a shovel and drive it in the ground around the plant at the edge of where the stems come out of the ground, because if you put plants under a little bit of stress, they tend to flower better. So you could do that right now or in the spring, either one.
Okay.
But then use the bulb booster type fertilizer that doesn't have a lot of nitrogen in, because nitrogen tends to inhibit flowering. So you want the phosphorus and potassium to be the second two numbers, to be the larger of the numbers on the analysis.
Okay, so the second two numbers. And then I have, just a second, I'm writing this down, a peach tree that it winters every year, but it doesn't get blossoms on it.
Okay, we'll get back to the old beat the tree. How old is the tree?
Probably 3 or 4.
Okay, so it's old enough now that you want it to fruit. So what I would do, and right away, because you may still be able to, get the flowers to initiate this fall yet. Because in fruit trees, the flower buds for next spring are initiated in August and September of the year prior. And so what you want to do is either take a carpet knife or a razor blade and cut into the bark and go about halfway around the tree. And you want to go right down to the wood. You don't want to take any of the bark out, because that would hurt the tree. But what you're doing is you're putting the tree under a little bit of stress.
Okay.
The other way you can do that is to take a pipe or a bat at nighttime, so your neighbors don't think you're nuts, and go out and beat the bark. You can actually go all the way around the tree, not like, a baseball bat swinging at a ball, but, just tap it hard enough that you're breaking a little bit of the connective tissue between the top and the bottom. So, yeah, you want to whack it a little bit, but that will also encourage the plant to set flower buds, because you're putting it under stress.
Okay. And the last one we got, I think, 2 years ago, and when we bought it at your store, it was gorgeous. It was like a cherry shrubbish kind of a plant, and it had beautiful blossoms, but then it didn't create any cherries, and this year it had the same thing.
Okay, you got a Nanking bush cherry.
Yep.
And those cherries, they're more for the birds than they are for consumption. They're about 90% pit and 10% flesh. And so they're more of an ornamental shrub than a fruiting shrub.
Okay, so if they don't if they don't have any cherries on them, it's nothing that we'll lose. It's just the birds will lose that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the call.
That's awesome, so that's good.
Okay.
All right, thank you very
Yep.
much.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you so much. I believe we have another call here for the Garden Doctor. Let's go back to the other line. Good morning. What's your question?
Good morning. I was wondering how to overwinter potted hens and chicks.
Hen and chicks potted?
Yes,
Do you have a heated garage?
I wish. No.
It's nice when you get up. I used to park outside when we lived in our old house, but now we have heat in the floor and 45 degrees. That
Hard to
car
go
looks
back.
really nice when you get up on those cold
I
mornings.
can imagine.
What you can do is plunge the pot in the ground so that the rim of the pot is even with the soil,
Okay.
and then cover it with about a foot of marsh hay or straw for the winter.
Okay.
And that, because you've got it in the ground, it'll protect the root system. Is this a container that you have them in, or?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, if you haven't got a somewhat heated garage, I mean, if you want to, have you got a garage at all?
Yes.
Okay, if you want to put them in the garage, what you can do is just put a half a dozen blankets over them,
Oh, okay.
because they don't need sunlight in the winter,
Okay.
and because it's cold in the garage, usually not as cold as outside.
Okay.
The thing you got to do is keep the roots from getting as cold as the tops.
Okay,
Tops
but they
will
don't.
make it through really well, but root systems of a plant are 20 to 30 degrees more label to the cold temperatures. So
Okay, they don't. I don't water them all winter then.
no, you don't have to water them. Maybe keep them good and moist when you're right now and into the rest of the fall. But then when you put them away, you know, they shouldn't be bone dry. But when you cover them with the blankets, they should be fine.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you for the call. If you have a question for the garden doctor, give us a little jingle, 920-885-4446. Let's go back to the other line. Hello, what is your question for the garden doctor?
Hello, I have two questions. One is, how much can I cut off my rose bush? And then how do I have to cover it for winter?
Okay.
And then my other question would be, I have had a bumper crop of Honeycrisp apples this year.
Oh,
Is there a way
everybody.
that I can? Is there a way I can store them?
Yes. The first question, do you know what the variety of the rose is? Is it a hardy rose or is it a hybrid tea or what?
Well, it must be very hardy because it's been alive for about 20 years.
Oh, okay.
It's getting taller and taller, and now it's about, I don't know how much I can cut back because it's about waist high.
Okay, so what I would say is just if you haven't covered it in the past, it's probably one of the hardy shrub roses. But in the springtime, what you want to do is go back to the base of the shrub rose and cut about half of the really thick branches out. And what will happen then is it will sprout new sprouts near where you cut those off. And then the following spring, you cut the other half off, and then you've got a new plant.
Very good.
Okay? And then after that, you just keep them trimmed. I mean, you can trim roses almost any time except from the middle of August through the time the leaves drop.
Well, I trim it every year, but I don't want to trim it back too far and kill it.
Yeah, well, you're not, if it's alive and you haven't done anything with it, it's probably a pretty hardy rose. And so you want to start it new. That's just like you do with lilacs or any of the bigger shrubs. You just take half of the big ones out the first spring and then the other half out the next spring, and then you've got a new shrub.
Okay. And how do I store my apples?
You want to keep them cool, probably in a cardboard box or in a bushel basket or something. You don't want to put them in plastic because the thing that causes apples to start to degrade is a gas called ethylene. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you don't put any rotten apples or bruised apples with the apples that you're storing, because anytime you bruise an apple, they start to give off this ethylene. It's a gas that's invisible, and it doesn't have to be in very high concentrations to make the apples start to go downhill. And in a cool, I would say probably 40 to 45 degrees is optimum for storing apples. And just use them as you want. Now, it seems to me the Honeycrisp is a medium as far as storing it. It's not a great store, but you can store them for quite a while in either a refrigerator or or in a cool garage. But make sure you don't have any apples that have bruises or that are starting to rot, because they'll, it's like the old saying, a bad apple will spoil the whole barrel. That's true. That's very true. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you for the call. If you have any extra apples, feel free to drop them over at the radio station. 920-885-4446. Let's head back to the phones. Busy day today. Hello, caller. What is your question for the garden doctor?
Yeah, is there a glad bulb that you can leave in the ground all year round now?
There are such a thing as a hardy glad, but most of the glads, the ones that produce the beautiful flowers, If you leave them in the ground, you come next year, they'll just be a mush. The best way to store glads is, as soon as the tops have been frosted, or I think they'll even freeze, you dig them up, you cut the top off right above the bulb, you kind of wash it gently, leave it sit out in the sunlight for a couple of days to heal over the injury, and then store them in an onion mesh bag so they've got a lot of circulation around them. You can remove people call them bulbless, but they're actually called caramels. And they will be the same color as the bulb that they came off from. And if you store them in a cool cellar, again, 45 degrees is probably optimum for glad storage. But you don't want to put them in a plastic bag or something where they don't get circulation, because then they'll dry rot on you.
All right. Because I got a neighbor, and I don't think they dug them up last year, and they came up this spring, and they look like they're in the same spot, same color.
They must be one of the hardier. Did they have the same large stems on them?
Yeah.
No, that's very unusual, because I had some that I had in the field next to my house, and I went to dig a few for a seminar I was doing, and there was nothing there. The tops were there, but there was nothing underneath. So
Well, I thought maybe they came out with a new.
No, the glads that you use for cut flowers, you have to store them indoors. They are not hardy enough. But there are some that are hardy glads, but they don't have the beautiful flowers on them.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you so much for all the calls. You can always give your call in to the Garden Doctor, 920-885-4446. There's a lot to unpack there. We can start with the apples. When they bruise, you mentioned that they release ethylene, and that's what accelerates the decomposition.
Right.
Is that true with all vegetables or fruits, or just apples?
Well, it's true of all fruits like pears, plums, and things like that.
Okay.
Apples especially, but yeah, when they're storing apples, like in Washington, where they grow a lot of apples and you buy them in the stores later on, they actually they store them in big bin boxes, and they actually exchange the air quite often to get that ethylene out of there, because that actually starts the decomposition, and I think it's the thing that starts the decomposition of most things, when they have that ethylene present. So it's good to keep good air circulation around the apples, and like I said, 40 to 45 degrees is the best temperature for storing apples.
885-4446. Let's head back to the phones. We got another question for the Garden Doctor. Good morning, caller. What's your question?
Yeah, I've got a Concord grape
Okay,
vine,
right.
and when you're supposed to trim that or cut it?
You trim it in the winter after the leaves and the fruit have been picked, or you can, if you've got the fruit off and you can see the structure of the plant, you can prune them right now. I mean, you're not going to get any growth. I think the winter buds are set enough that you can start doing your fall and winter pruning. But there's systems that you use for pruning grapes, and it's really complicated to explain over the air. You almost need to have a picture, but what you want to do is get a central vine, a central cane coming up, and then get arms coming off the central cane. Usually there's 4. And then you get new canes coming out of those arms, and then when you take the fruit off, what you do is you cut the canes that fruited off this year, and then those ones that grew this summer you train over on the wires, so that you keep the grapes as close to the root system as possible, because that's the only way you'll get really good fruit. If you don't do that, what happens is every year the fruit gets another year's growth farther out on the plant, and the farther it is away from the root system, the later and the poorer the fruit will be. So there are other systems. I mean, if you go on the internet and put in grape pruning methods, you'll find probably 25 or 30 different methods for doing it. But yeah, the whole thing is to keep those fruit clusters as close to the root system as possible, and you know that the fruit that you get next year will be grown will be on the vines that were grown this summer.
All right, because I've had this in the ground for, I think, at least 10 years, and I still haven't got a grape out of it.
Oh, really?
No. Well, it hasn't never been pruned either.
That's unusual because Concord, although it's not my favorite grape because it's so late, usually it's a pretty reliable fruiting. Yeah, so I really don't know what to tell you. I guess what I would do is like with the hydrangea and the other things, do some root pruning, put the plant under a little bit of stress, because it sounds like your plant is juvenile. It loves to grow, and as long as it's growing, it doesn't go to its adult stage. And by root pruning and trimming and doing some pruning on it, you'll put it under a little stress, and that will give you fruit next summer.
Maybe I'll get it to grow some fruit next year.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the call. This is the second time, Dick, but you've mentioned applying stress to plants in order to facilitate growth. This is the first time that I've heard of it. So can you apply the same type of stress to all plants? Are there certain techniques that you recommend that are safe to use for most plants in our garden?
Yeah, I mean, root pruning is probably the most effective. And like with the fruit trees, if you've got a fruit tree that hasn't fruited or hasn't blossomed, you know that it's just a kid. It likes to grow a lot, and it's probably a tree that's really grown a lot, because they do grow quite rapidly when they're juvenile. But you want to get it into its adult stage, and you do that by putting it under stress, by root pruning it, by it's called scoring, where you take a sharp blade and go through the bark right down to the wood. And what you're doing basically there is separating the root system from the top, and that puts the tree under a little bit of stress. Now, you don't want to take any of the bark out, because then you're separating the root. You just want to do that, and what happens is the plant will almost immediately regrow the xylem and the phloem that you've cut, but it puts it under enough stress that it goes from its juvenile into its adult stage, and then it'll start setting fruit. But the rule of thumb with almost all spring flowering plants, apples, plums, pears, strawberries, raspberries, the fruit buds are set the year before, in August and September of the year before. And you can actually, if you know what you're looking for, you can actually go out and look at a plant, and you can tell if it's a fruit bud or if it's a leaf bud by the size of the bud. If it's a large fat bud, it's a fruit bud, and if it's a sharp, smaller bud, it's a leaf bud. So
if it's fat, it's a fruit bud. If
yep,
it's small,
it's a flowering
it's a leaf
bud. It will produce a flower, and if it's just a sharp, smaller bud, it'll produce leaves and stems.
We have another call for the Garden Doctor. Let's head back to the lines. Hello, caller. What's your question for Dick Zondag?
Yeah, hi. You've probably gotten a lot of questions about this in the next week or two, but mums. I know a lot of the mums aren't treated by it.
Yeah, if you're buying one of the flowering mums from our garden center or any other store, they're almost always annuals. I mean, you get beautiful flowers for the fall, and it decorates your house, but they're probably going to die in the winter, even though they're most of them are hardy mum varieties, but they're hardy when you get down into Illinois and southern Illinois in that area. If you want to try and overwinter mums, you almost have to plant them in the spring so that they're established in the soil before they flower. If you want to try with the potted mums, the way to do it is as soon as the flowers or the leaves are frosted and the plants are they look dead, cut the tops off and there's a straw over that. And if we have a mild winter, they might make it through, and probably they won't.
Now we're expecting some frost and maybe even a freeze on Friday and Saturday night. Do
Right.
they have to be covered, or are they hardy enough?
If you want to make sure, just throw a blanket or tarp or a piece of plastic. Basically, what you're doing is you're making a small greenhouse. You know, the heat that's stored in the soil is coming up out of the ground to keep the plants underneath warm so that they don't freeze.
Okay.
Okay?
That's what I need to know. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the call. That will do it for calls for this edition of Jung's Garden Center, the Garden Doctor, Dick Zondag. You mentioned that this is the final day for us to accumulate Jung dollars.
Right. We're going to be
With every
cashing
purchase.
those in. And the other thing is that we basically everything outside the perennial, not the mums and the fall flowering stuff, but all of the potted perennials, all of the nursery stock and trees are on sale at 50% off. And with that discount, there's no guarantee with them either. But they're the same plants that you would have bought at regular price and had a guarantee. And if you want a guarantee, you can pay a regular price. But we're trying to liquidate all of the plants that are in our outdoor nursery, the shrubs and trees and any fruit trees that are left and any shade trees that are left so that we don't have to store them over the winter.
And how's your YouTube page been going? Have you uploaded any recent videos?
I have done some YouTube videos in the fall. We've uploaded some of them. We're even thinking about having a Garden Doctor channel next year. We're building up a video library of lots of different things, and we'll be working on that over the winter. Plus, we'll be doing kind of like the Garden Doctor seminars that we do, like how to start a garden, how to plant bare root, how to do this, how to do that. So that's something to look forward to, and yeah, we'll be working on that.
I'm sure you're excited for your debut on the silver screen. Cannot wait for that moment. And thank you so much for joining us again. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And that will do it for today's Garden Doctor, brought to you by Jung's Garden Center. This is 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
The proceeding was a paid programming. Advice and opinions expressed during the program are solely that of Jung Garden Center, not WBEV or Good Karma Brands.